there's 6 of us, and there may be additional people coming on, but that's okay. And I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving, and you're all looking forward to the winter or Christmas holidays or Hanukkah or whatever else is going on in terms of other religious or cultural beliefs. And anyway, okay. We have a lot of topics. Probably Dane Fiorello is joining us now. Probably enough topics to keep us going for half a year, but that's okay. If there are any of the topics on this list that you have, or that's on the Zoom announcement, and you want to see them moved up, please let me know, because the only thing that's set in stone is once we do the recording. Anyway, so finished breakfast, Eric? No. No audio. Okay. Morning, Dane.
I finished the main course.
Morning.
So, okay.
Main course.
So our first question is, I'm going to read the whole thing here. What makes someone want to be a sensei beyond just getting their black belt? Is that a legitimate goal for every head sensei for his black belts? Because competition can get in the way. Is there a way to improve the odds of black belts becoming sensei? And I forget who it was last time mentioned more or different responsibilities as a student moves up through the Q grades. And we're going to get some examples. And should a student who just wants a black belt bucket list get one? So that's the first topic. So, what makes someone want to be a sensei? Anyone want to jump in and try and answer that one? Oh, come on now.
They don't know what they're asking for.
You know what they're asking. I would agree with that 100%. Yes.
I want to start first from my perspective. Why I would like to become that sensei. Again, this is only one perspective, and that is I believe everybody has a right to self-defense, and I enjoy the martial arts and self-defense aspect, and I want to be able to teach it. So that would be my motivation to become a sensei. In regards to someone getting the black belt, if that's the goal and it's achievable, do it. If you want to become a sensei, you really do have to have a passion for teaching the art. So my perspective is I wanted to be able to teach everybody how to stay safe.
Okay, any other comments? I know there are times of being a teacher for a number of years, and some of you who've been on the mat for decades as well. You can kind of look at students, particularly as they hit the upper Q grades, and you can kind of gauge as to whether or not they maybe want to be a sensei by how much they're helping out other students, even without your instruction. Or if you ask them, they're willing and they do a surprisingly good job. So those are those are some things I look at. Because I like to have my brown belts in particular, I'd like to have them assisting and helping out, because my ultimate goal is you're going to get your black belt and hopefully you'll become a sensei, but you won't open your dojo across the street from me.
Sensei, that would just give you two dojos to teach at. You'd be guest senseiing all the time across the street.
Like a second parking lot.
Serious.
Yeah, there it is.
Who made the second parking lot comment? That's a secret from summer camp. But even the city is aware of that problem, and they're frustrated too. But anyway,
I think too, it comes down to like a creative impulse, like in music. Some of the best classical musicians in the world can play the most complicated music, and they're better than anybody, but they don't write music. They don't want to create it. They just want to play it.
okay.
And I think that's your standard black belt. They want to be like excellent at the performance of material. And then I think there's people who want to create black belts. And I think that's kind of similar to a musician that wants to also compose. A lot of singers just sing what's handed to them. Some singers write music too, that kind of thing. I think it's like when you have excellence at anything, there's a point where you either create in that field or you're just, a technician in that field or something. So I feel like it's a creative impulse kind of.
Okay. It's a good analogy there. I know when I had student teachers, because I was a master teacher for one of the local universities, and they'd always ask me, how do you want me to teach this subject? And I'd say, try stuff. I said, if it doesn't work, you've learned from the experience. But I'm not going to tell you how to do this. Such as Michael Language, who is taking over the active control of the becoming the head sensei for the Burbank Parks dojo. He teaches differently than I do, but he knows his material, and if he's going to teach it a different way, we're all different. There's no how do you say it? Nothing is locked in stone, and as long as he gets the students to the same result, how he gets them there is as a sensei, and that's the responsibility, is how a sensei gets them there is that sensei's responsibility. As long as you're not doing anything indecent or immoral or something like that. So yeah, it's I think you're right, Dane. You either become a technician, you just do, or you decide, I'd like to do this on my own and open my own dojo and suffer the first 2 or 3 years at least, until things get fairly solid. That's the big challenge for new instructors is they've got to be willing to. The first couple of years are going to be rough until you get and I know Chris can speak to this, and I'm pretty sure Dave can. I can, and I think Darren as well. Until you get a strong base of students who are continually coming back and working through the ranks, you're out there wondering, am I doing a good job? It's a matter of that black belt having the patience to persevere. But
I think you just hit on something there too, where there's something about personal development in the martial arts, right? So when you're a white belt, you can't do anything and you're struggling, and you progressively get better and see, those advances and everything until you're a black belt, and then you're good. Then there's two kinds of people who like to plateau and feel like, okay, I'm good. And other people who want that challenge all over again. Like, you want to kind of start over with something you can't do. So the next thing you do is kind of reset it and become a white belt at running a school until you're good at that. I think sensei are people who are never happy with success. They're looking for the next thing to be successful at. They don't want to stop there. It's like, well, what's next from here? Let me do something new and get good at that too. I think there's that drive.
That's a good point, because I can look back. I've changed the way I taught numerous times, even in a classroom, or both the jiu-jitsu program. I've put students together. Initially, we did not have a 5th Q belt in Budoshin Jujitsu. It was green belt to purple belt, then the browns, because that's the way Seki did it. Our purple belt exam was so difficult that most students had to take it 3 or 4 times before they pass. And that's where I was losing students. And so I got a brown belt and a purple belt and a green belt together. And I said, I'd like you to revise the purple belt test. I said, maybe you can add a 4th Q test. And they did. They divided the techniques up. And ultimately, they ended up with 2 belt exams, both passable. But ultimately, the student learned more techniques because they added a couple techniques in that I didn't have there. And it seems to have worked. And so it's, you as an instructor or sensei, you always have to be open to change. And I think part of the frustration of some sensei, and this is a totally different topic, is we can see a problem, we don't know how to resolve it, and I don't know if we don't want to place this burden on a couple of our students, or we don't know what resources we have to help resolve the problem. And so we're stuck. And sometimes, I mean, this has happened in jiu-jitsu, this has happened to the classroom teacher. There are times when I have turned to the class and said, this is not working, what can we do to fix it? And surprisingly, most of the time, they will come up with some pretty good ideas that I can work from. And that's also, I think, another good criteria for a sensei is as I said before, you have to be willing to listen to the ideas of others, because it may turn something on your brain, in your brain cells, and you say, I'm going to try that, or I'm going to modify it or some way. But yeah, I think that's one of the big challenges for a sensei is, when stuff doesn't work, who do you turn to? There's no business association for martial arts senseis that deals with those issues. And it's also kind of hard to admit as a sensei that you're having a problem or that you're stuck. Whereas with students or other black belts that you're training to hopefully become a sensei, if they make a mistake, you can help them improve upon it. And so that's kind of different, but I think I went off on a tangent here. So anything else that what makes a person want to be a sensei?
I just have more of a question,
Oh,
Sensei. I
sorry,
just
Darren.
um it's I'm focused back on the initial topic of the, why do you want to become a sensei, and is a sensei, or is it okay to have someone that wants to achieve a black belt as their bucket list? And that's kind of where I'm stuck. I think there's, just with the bucket list one, there's a lot more avenues that you can look at. I mean, Dane touched on something a little bit that kind of piqued my interest, and that was he mentioned that some people just want to plateau, and I was thinking along that topic, and I think we've had other topics through some of the other sessions that are relatable to this. Is are they actually eligible to achieve a black belt level just because they're saying that's part of my bucket list? Because in my interpretation, I feel like they're missing a whole lot more. So then, does that make them eligible to make that, to be awarded that next achievement or rank or status? That's where I'm kind of stuck. That was a question.
Yeah,
I don't know if
I-
there's any other comments with it.
I think, I mean, from my perspective, from my dojo, if a person is testing for black belt, there are a lot, it's not just technical knowledge. It's their attitude, it's their approach to helping other students. It's, there are other things I'm looking at. Can they use the terminology appropriately? Do they, have some idea of what they're talking about? Are they interested in helping students? Are they helping out the dojo? I look at all these things when I promote when I'm looking at a person for black belt, because to me, that shows that they're willing to become involved in the dojo beyond just themselves. And to me, the bucket list is, I am doing this for me. And
Yeah.
because I've known some people that, they get a black belt in judo, then they go and get a black belt in aikido, then they go get a black belt in kung fu, then they go get a black belt in MMA. Well, I don't know if it's accurate, but they get all these first degrees, and they how do you say, somehow to me they've missed the concept, because they don't really put any of this stuff together. I mean, that's the concept they've missed, but to me that's somewhat of a bucket list person, because there's got to be some other goal here. I mean,
It's like being a first year college student. Like, they've taken like 101 of 10 different things.
yeah,
Right. Yeah.
and it. I mean, I'm not trying to undermine what they have learned, but the question is, what have they learned?
Yeah.
Right. What haven't they learned?
Or what haven't they learned?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I may share, Sensei and Darren, it's related to what Darren already mentioned about the bucket list, and also Dane. Some people, the paradigm is that black belt is the finish line, but some people who teach afterwards, basically, the black belt is the start of mastery. So those are two different paradigms. And if you stop from just getting the black belt, you'll never get that level of mastery. And mastery includes teaching. So that's for me why some people would love to teach. But there are people they also have the issue with the skills. They're so good, but they cannot really teach. And there are those people who are really, really good, who are just plainly bad, but they also don't want to teach, or they cannot really teach. So basically, that's for me. And from what I've seen, a lot of people who are really mastered are those who taught others as well.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think looking at myself, I was, how do you say, I did not test for Shodan. Seki rarely tested people per se. He just kept his eye on you. And when there was someone who's teaching at a local Y had to leave, and he turned to another brown belt, and we were both first brown. And he said, "You're going to take over the Burbank YMCA dojo." And we both said, "But we're not black belts." He says, "You are now, act like it." And that was his approach. You really can't get away with that today. I don't think really in the United States anywhere. Of course, that was back in the 60s. But because you have to, how do you say, you have to be able to quantify or justify the reason for giving a person a rank today, rather than saying, "I think you're good enough. You've demonstrated to me that you're capable. You've done well with students." All these essentially non-measurable skills. Plus, I know you know the techniques, okay? So, but unfortunately today, you really can't promote people just on your opinion. I think Dave's chomping at the bit to say something, but that's that's to an extent frustrating. If I think a person is capable, I will do as subtly as I can. I will start pushing them. Because I think you can do this, or try this, or because sometimes you just have to push students to get them to realize what they can do. And I think that's one of the motives we all have, is that we do push our students, because we most of them we believe in, and we believe they can succeed. They just need to make that decision. And that's the hard part. Dave, say it. Got a slight smile on you.
I'll just say that my excuse for becoming a sensei is I come from a long line of teachers on both sides of my family, and I think that people who want to become senseis just want more children and don't want to have to pay their college education. Because I know that the people I have taught, even the adults, the adults are just big kids. They very much sometimes see me as not just a teacher, but a solid, authentic friend, and also at times come to me for advice, totally unrelated to jiu-jitsu, but they want my opinion to make a life decision. Well, that's parenting.
Yeah.
So I'm always honored, and I do my best, but when you fall short, it's like, well, let's take another stab at it.
Okay.
Dave just made me think of I think one of the motivating factors for being a sensei too. The word itself means person who's come before, right? So it's kind of like warning people about like what's ahead of them. Like climbing Mount Everest and then having the like impulse to come back down the mountain to say, "Hey, everybody, watch out here, be careful there. I found a good way to climb this." Like once you've achieved something, you want to help other people achieve it. And you're kind of giving, like, you've arrived someplace and now you're giving directions. You want other people to be there with you. I think it's kind of that kind of a thing. Like you were saying, people come to you for advice about things that have nothing to do with jiu-jitsu. Because they know you're somebody who's come before them and achieved things. So they want to know how do you achieve things, not just jujitsu things, you know, and they know you can apply jujitsu to that and they can learn from that. And I think there's something about sensei that they know they're somewhere that other people want to get, and they know how to help direct them there, you know.
There's also, you know, we can look at senseis like there's a magnanimous piece here, but there's also a very selfish piece, and that is wanting to learn more. And teaching is intensified learning.
Okay, and that
Mhm.
that segue, and we've been touching on this, is teaching learning. And I guess that's the next question we need to look at is teaching learning.
Intensified.
Because to me, teaching is where you find all your mistakes.
Yeah.
And then you have to correct them. And
I think it can go both ways if you're not careful. I think that if you're doing the kind of teaching that we're all talking about here, I think then, yeah, absolutely, it's the next way to learn. And that's probably when you really learn, is when you're watching other people learn it and adapting it and explaining it and trying to explain it to their understanding. And like, I think Einstein said, you don't understand anything unless you can explain it to a 3-year-old. You know, that's when you really know your stuff.
that's the problem.
But there's some teachers, I think, that are more into that like discipline aspect, and they just want to say, go do this, and then they sit down and, you know, eat their rice while they're not paying attention to you, and you just go struggle and you can't figure it out, and they won't help you, and they're not adapting it, and they just want you to like push through and do what they said, you know. And I think those people stagnate. I think they get locked in exactly how they understand everything, and you either do what they did or you don't, and you leave. You know, I think those people, even though they think they're teaching, are more like punishing. You know what I mean? And I don't think they get that growth.
Right.
Those people are teaching the same year over and over again for their entire career, as opposed to someone who's clarifying their thoughts to present material and then forced on the spot to clarify their thoughts yet again to present it yet another way to a student who doesn't get it or truly doesn't understand it. Now you have two ways to explain it. If you keep doing that, you're going to have multiple ways to explain most ideas, most concepts, most techniques, forms, and you grow as a teacher so that the next year you teach, you're far better at relating the material. And each subsequent year is the goal.
Yeah.
Teaching is absolutely learning for me. I find how I could refine everything I do in teaching. And then, you know, Dave, you're saying, you know, to clarifying your thoughts, or I get into infinite detail when I'm trying to instruct so much to where Sensei Kirby has told me in the past, okay, let's lose a bunch of that and let's just focus on where you need to go with it, and try to bring that back into perspective to stay on track with where somebody could really understand what you're doing. So looking at, I identify my own mistakes in teaching. I identify how to refine things in teaching, and I absolutely learn every time I do instruct and teach, in every regard to be a better martial artist.
Yeah, I agree with Darren. There are times I know when I explain techniques, I go so far off into the sunset that I have trouble coming back to, okay, we're learning how to do a basic hip throw. And it's something, you know, you can acquire knowledge, etc., but you have to be very, I don't want to say cautious, but you have to be very aware of what you're telling students. And who said it? You have to, like you're talking to Dane said, you have to remember that you are talking to 3-year-olds. And concepts, you know, concepts that I might understand as being simple as buttering toast, a white belt doesn't even know what toast is. So, you really have, as a sensei, you have to be very careful as to how much information you give out. Because sometimes by the time we're done explaining a technique, the students have forgotten what technique you're trying to teach.
Yeah.
How, or how you demonstrated that technique or what have you. And then you've got to start all over again.
That's learning in itself, Sensei. It's just being
Yes.
able to evaluate your audience, understanding their experience level.
Right.
Well, you guys keep mentioning 3-year-olds. Chris Kadamian's been teaching since he's 3. Chris is
You're in the middle of the screen here.
Well, I mean, it all goes back. These aren't necessarily unique to martial arts, right? These kinds of questions. It's really how it applies in martial arts, how it plays out in martial arts. What causes anybody to teach has to do with their motivation. It's really just how somebody's wired, how they think, that, to me, brings about the thought of, okay, I think it'd be good to, start teaching, or maybe they fall into that situation. That was my case. I never sat and planned on teaching. It just, there was a need. I stepped up, I did it. And, here I am 30 years later, but it's really what it comes down to is the motivation. And one of the things is too, is your motivations change sometimes, through life. Even your reasons for training or doing anything. You may have started for one reason, but then, now you're motivated by something different, not necessarily the same reasons you started with. Same in your teaching journey. I find that what makes the best teachers are the ones that continue to learn. So they're continuing to train and continuing to learn. And it could look different, it doesn't mean they're, doing 5-hour workouts every day, or anything. It could be reading, researching, or practicing. One of the concepts of Do, right, is a path, it's a way. So sensei, one who's gone before, doesn't necessarily imply that they've arrived at their destination. They're just further ahead than the students that they're leading. So that means there's continuous movement. And as long as you're moving, you're still learning and experiencing new things or getting a new perspective on things you thought you learned before. I think most everybody here has been practicing a long time. And if you look back 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, however long you've been practicing, 40, at every decade, if you were to stop and think, you probably thought you understood pretty good. And then 10 years later, when you look back, you think, I didn't really know very much, compared to what I understand today. And that's part of the fun for me too, is, for me, I like kind of open world type of things where I can continue to explore. I get bored, if I think I've learned everything. But life has taught me that it doesn't work that way. As long as you stay on the path, you keep moving, you keep exploring, you keep poking, you keep trying to break things down and understand it. There's an enrichment process that happens that deepens your level of understanding. It enriches your experience, and it brings about kind of a sense of joy, like, oh my gosh, look what I discovered. And then depending on your motivation and how you're wired as a teacher, you want to go back and share that, with people that are further back on the path, because you're so excited about it. I think nobody with a good heart who finds something exciting just wants to keep it the rest to themselves until the day they die. There's a sense of joy that you want to share with others. And whether they understood it in the scientific way we do now or not, I think, in the old days, they kind of worked it out this way where, when you think about the world, the galaxy, our solar system, the universe, everything, from what we know now is in a constant state of movement, right? So even when you look at a rock, the atoms are still in a state of vibration. It's just not as great as, something that's more flexible. So I think nature itself, promotes a sense of continuous movement, and if you want to harmonize with nature, and so that should be our thought process, whether we're students, teachers, or anything else in between. That sense of life is always moving, and we need to move, which equals to continuing to learn, explore, and then pass on and share with others. So, that's kind of my thought process. Is I'm constantly changing stuff. I never change content, but I constantly change the way we deliver that content, because the world around me keeps changing. It used to be every 5 years, where I would notice a big change in culture and behavior. Now it feels like it's like every year or every 6 months. So if I continue to deliver what I want to pass on the same way, then I'm not going to be effective, even though I may think it's better, right? So I'm constantly adapting, to the world around me, not catering to the lowest common denominator, but just repackaging what we have in a way where they can understand it and the way they can digest it. Because otherwise, what's the point? If otherwise I'll just take on, 12 people and just that'll be my path to just walk with them and teach them the rest of my life and not worry about the rest of the world. But if I want to reach a greater population, because I believe what we have will benefit the world, and in return they will benefit the people around them, and everything will be better, then I have to be flexible, which means I have to keep learning, I have to keep moving, I have to keep adapting. Otherwise, I'm not going to be an effective teacher. And if I'm not, then what's the point of teaching?
Okay,
Probably more than you asked for, but
that's okay.
Chris, to your point, I'm totally on board with what you're saying, and it makes all the sense in the universe. Every so often, we do run into a person who may be a sensei or just a black belt, but they do feel like they have arrived, and they don't realize that they've stagnated, but they tend to have a notion of I'm all that plus a bag of potato chips, and those people can be dangerous to be around, because they have an elevated sense of self-importance and so forth, because they've accomplished something and now they're going to parade it around. And I've been around a few like that, and I'm learning to avoid them as much as possible, and be polite, but that's the exact opposite of what you're saying, which is teachers continue to grow, students continue to grow. We stop growing, we stagnate. We're not doing ourselves or anyone around us any good.
Yeah, you're right. And ironically, those are the least confident people. I know they don't realize that, but that's why they continue to have to prove themselves, because they think they know everything. But they're the least confident. The most confident people have the least to prove, in my mind, at least from my experience. And yeah, they're just much nicer to be with. And look, this isn't an individual thing. I mean, part of the fun, I think the reason we're all here is we enjoy interacting with other martial artists, right? So even though we may be practicing different things and stuff, we're all interested in growing and learning, from each other and sharing, those things. So, somebody that thinks they've arrived, and again, that's not unique to martial arts. You run into that everywhere. They're usually the most defensive people that are constantly having to prove themselves.
It's a great point. I discounted that type of sensei when I've been thinking about this today. That sensei who's there just as a self-promoting ego boost, you know, I forget about that kind of person, but that's definitely a motivating factor, is becoming a sensei so other people think you are. And so you can lie to yourself that you are, you know. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Like, all of us are here, I think, to learn from each other. Like, we're all here because we're hungry to talk to each other and learn, like you were saying. And I think you won't find those sensei here. The ones that are I think they don't come here because they feel like they just have so much to offer that it's not worth it to them. But in reality, they just wouldn't have anything to offer, you know. And it's a sad thing when that's your sensei. You know, what can you ever, like, I think Mr. Miyagi said, there's no bad students, only bad teachers. You know?
Some days I wonder, though.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not sure Mr. Miyagi gets everything right, but
I think
there are bad teachers. He's half right, at least.
yeah,
It's very interesting hearing everybody's perspective, and it really does make me think of you have those sensei that stagnate and they think it's their way or the highway, and they are the most they have this fake confidence about them, but when you question them, they break down. And then you have the students that or sensei that continue to evolve. They fully admit with confidence that they don't know anything, but they're still learning so much, and that they are able to teach it. But they had that humbleness because they know that there's still so much to learn, even though they know much more than your typical student or regular black belt. These sensei, they can teach a whole variety of people, but they themselves are still continuing to evolve their art.
When those sensei display that kind of humility, they're revealing their authenticity and their humanness, as opposed to the person who's stagnated and is not paying attention to what's left to learn, but focused on their own previous accomplishment. One of the things that is worth knowing is that when they constantly feel like they have to prove themselves, a lot of times it's at someone else's expense.
Yeah.
And that's a downer. So best to find a way to avoid those situations and those sensei when that happens.
right. I mean, in my book, if what you do as a sensei is to the, I won't say disadvantage of a student, because sometimes you do have to disappoint them. If it's to the detriment or it hurts the student physically or emotionally, that's entirely different than saying, you know, you're not up to this particular skill level yet, but you know, with a bit more practice, I have faith that you're going to make it, because the student does rely on you to be, you're in essence their judge and jury. Well, you may be the judge when there's no jury, but I mean, that's a position you're in, and that's for one human to judge another human is a huge responsibility. And that's why to some extent we have, you know, in martial arts we have promotional criteria, so the students can see what's required of them, parents can see it, and they're happy, and whomever else can, you know, needs to see it, can see it, and they're happy. And as long as you as a sensei follow those rules as well, the world continues to turn. And that's the whole part of the whole key of being a sensei, is that, you know, you're the person that's setting the standards, but you have to be willing, you as a person and a sensei has to be willing to follow those standards as well. And to an extent, that's why, you know, the martial arts in terms of promotional criteria, sometimes it just become very, very specific, and there's not very, I don't want to say it's cut and dry, but we try and make it as cut and dry as possible so that to the advantage of both the student and ourselves. But I think I've gotten off the track here. What else do I need to say about this? I think, you know, if we're teaching and not learning, we're not really teaching, because part of the teaching process is learning yourself how to do things better. Or maybe how not to do something. I've had students who've shown me better ways to teach a technique than I've taught it. And that's the way I teach that technique now, because it's simply easier to teach that way. So sometimes you just have to watch, and this is mainly your advanced students, you have to watch them to see what they're doing. Like who said you can't just show the technique and then go eat your rice? And I almost drew an analogy to Seki that way, because he never explained the details of how to do a technique. He would just show it 4 or 5 times, and he'd say, "Okay, go do it." And he watched for the most part. But if you finally, and it happened with me several times, if I finally got a small detail down, and he did this with other students as well, he would say to me, Joji, you finally got it. Because I had found some small aspect of a technique that made its execution a lot easier. And I mean, that compliment from him, maybe once every 3-4 months, to me made all the difference in the world. And I've made it a point that when I see a student do something really well, I will compliment them, because they need to have that immediate feedback. It's like 3-year-olds, you know, 3-year-old does something right, you've got, you know, they've got to have immediate gratification of some sort or another, even if it's, you know, you did really good, we're going to go to Disneyland tomorrow because of that. No, that gets expensive. But you know, we do, as sensei, part of our teaching is complimenting students when they do something really well. And on the other hand, if a student is making a mistake, we have a responsibility to help them fix that mistake. And something which I'm really missing now is to me, it has to be a hands-on situation where I will take the place of the uke, that student's uke, and I'll have them apply the technique, and I'll apply it to them how it's supposed to feel, you know, and I ask them, do you feel this, etc.? What is it making you do? You know, the whole 10 yards that Darren and I would go through. And then once we've thrown them very slowly, we'll say, okay, now you do this to me, and you give them the same kind of feedback if the technique is working correctly or not working correctly. Because one of the hardest things I've found trying to teach my students is, don't look at the technique you're doing. Look at the direction you want to go. You know, on the street, you can't watch for the technique you're doing, because, or what will they do worse? They'll actually look at their partner's face to see if they're in pain, to see if the technique is where I said, don't look at a person's face. It's their face is useless. You know, you've got to do techniques by feel. And eventually, you know, eventually they get the concept, but they need that one-on-one with a sensei who's willing to go through a bit of suffering to help them. And I think, you know, like I said, our responsibility is maybe not to just teach, but to help students learn. And what they're learning is far beyond any particular technique. Such as, you know, don't look at the person's face to see if the technique is working. Because if you want the technique to force them to go to their right, which is your left, and you're using your key properly, what direction should you be looking at? What direction should you be looking? If you want them to go to your left, what direction should you be looking?
Left.
Left, correct. Okay.
Hard left.
Pardon?
Hard left if you want them to fly hard.
Hard left, right. And once they get that concept, you know, that's a major concept for them, because that applies to every technique and move they're going to do. I know, at least for jiu-jitsu, but probably most other martial arts as well. And of course, then they have to understand what ki is. Okay. And that's a whole other ball game. But anyway,
You know, Sensei, this might be a whole different topic actually, but while you were talking, it made me think there's two kinds of ways to approach a student understanding something. And one is, like we were saying, where you explain it to them and you need to understand and all of that. And then there is, like you were saying with Seki, that's not necessarily leaving them alone. It's letting them figure it out for themselves.
yes.
You know, and there's kind of two different things. So, you know, even in karate, I've studied under people that are very, very into explaining things, you know, down to like technical physical terms, you know, and like you need to get your hips aligned in a certain way. I mean, like very specific things. And everybody looks like a cookie cutter and they all do everything exactly the same. And you're kind of becoming that sensei. He's teaching you how to be him. He's teaching you how he throws a kick, how he executes his power, whatever. And then I've had other sensei, like the Okinawans, you know, going off and eating their rice, telling you to go do something. And then when you're figuring it out, though, like you said, there's a moment where you figure out some little small thing and Seki's like, that's what I was waiting for you to do. And I'm not sure which one's better, or if there's a balance between the two, or if different people need different things. But that might be a topic to explore too, is those different kinds of teaching methods where, you know, are you teaching them how to be you, or are you teaching them how to be them? And, you know, with that style of teaching, you kind of end up doing things your way. You know, you execute it how it's good for you to execute that kick. And, you know, the other person can recognize you're doing that technique differently, but effectively. And then that's good. So it's just different.
Yeah. I think it, whether it be the explaining, which to me includes showing and hands-on, etc., and standing back and then saying, oh, you finally got it. I think ultimately they're both doing the same thing, because if you work with the student and they do the technique right, and then you get them back to their uke and they're doing the technique, you need to make a compliment that they're being successful. And that's the same as standing back and saying, ah, Joji, you finally got it. That's what, I mean, if you've been a parent, you know that complimenting your kid is the neatest thing they can have. That makes their day. And adults are the same. You got to compliment. We have to compliment each other, because that's so essential for, I guess, our own self-image, or whatever you want to call it. We do occasionally need someone to say, you're doing okay, you're doing well, what you did was great. You made my day, thank you. we need, I mean, I don't know what you call it, like, it's some,
Validation.
you need some validation or positive feedback, or there was an educational term that I was going to use, but when someone said validation, it took the phrase out of my mouth. We all need that, whether we be kids or adults. And as sensei, that's, part of our responsibility is to let students know when they are doing something right, such as we recognize it's our responsibility to correct them if they're doing something wrong. And you have to do both. I had a kid in when I was teaching at Grant High School. He was a senior, gangbanger. And I got my experience with gangbangers teaching junior high school and dealing with people on campus who weren't supposed to be there. But one day he said to me, "Mr. K, why do you keep dissing me?" He was failing my class. He says, "Why do you keep dissing me?" You all know what dissing means?
Oh, yeah.
Disrespecting me. Okay. And I said, "Well, if you'd stop dissing yourself, other people would stop dissing you as well." And he looked at me, and, sometimes you really have to be straight up with people and also use their language, as long as it's not an obscenity, to get them to recognize that you're trying to help them, they need to change. He ended up getting a C in the class. Because after that, his total, I don't know I still don't understand how that one retort back to him made an impression, but he got to work and he got a C in the class. And we ended the semester on really good terms. So, we do, I mean, you don't say to a student, "You're a total airhead, you're never going to get this stuff, get off my mat, leave the dojo, your parents are going to disinherit you, you will never be a success in the world." I had a high school English teacher who told me not to go to college because I'd never graduate. And after I got my master's degree, I happened to run into her because I went back to see my history teacher, who has really turned me on to teaching. And she just about fainted because she remembered me. We did not agree with each other on anything. It's the only English class I got. I think I got a courtesy D from her. Courtesy D is when you don't want to fail the student. But she was totally, she couldn't believe it. And you don't want to destroy a student's ego. So you have to make your points tactfully and selectively. I recently had one student who was an MMA student, and he'd been in the class for about half a year. I could not get him to slow down and relax. He was doing things so fast that he couldn't do jiu-jitsu techniques because he was using so much muscle and trying to go so fast that he couldn't learn the technique. And when I'd slow him down and work with him one-to-one, he would actually get it. And he'd say, "Ah," and then he'd go back to being. Anyway, so someone made it, who had been in the class for a shorter time, got a promotion that he didn't. He felt he deserved the promotion because he had been in class longer. And I said, and by this time we're exchanging by email, and in essence, the decision was that he needed to just go back to his MMA dojo. because his attitude was such that at that point I can, based on some other things he said in the email correspondence, I felt he'd be a safety hazard because he did sort of injure a couple students, and he was just, he just couldn't he was trying so hard. I mean, I felt bad for him because he was trying so hard to do right that I won't say he was doing wrong. He was trying so hard to do right that he couldn't do right. And anyway. Okay, let's switch to the next topic, which is something which I have a problem with, and I know I've gotten worse over the years on it. How important is anatomy and physiology to the teaching of jiu-jitsu? If it's important, how do you incorporate it? Is it really useful in explaining how and why techniques work?
100,000%. Yes, you need it. The anatomy of the body and how it works is it's all part of physics. If you are doing in Ude Guruma, you need to know how the shoulder locks up, how the elbow locks up, how the wrist locks up, and so on. So the anatomy and the physiology is definitely, I consider it part of the whole martial arts in general. It's now one of the things that I try to do is, like, I'm trying to come up with ways that someone can learn not only the anatomy in English, but also using our terminology. So if I'm using a karate block, for example, I try to break it down to where I have this part of my forearm, then I have this part of my forearm. I do a karate block. I'm using the strongest part of the bone. That's the ulna. So I'm blocking with my ulna. You come up with phrases like that, and that I also explain this part. This is the radius. Why? I'm turning. It's attached to the thumb. So it's turning radial, the radius. So radial. I forget the exact term, but being able to break down the anatomy in such a way, now attach that to Japanese terminology, and it helps make your language more universal. But definitely, I believe knowing the anatomy and the physiology of the human body can help make jiu-jitsu work.
I'm glad you started with that, Eric. Otherwise, I would have to go back and evaluate my performance at summer camp.
Okay. I think it's important to an extent, and my explanations have changed over the years as I have learned more about physiology and the physics of body movement. And my by the time of students are purple belt, they know the difference between child joints and parent joints, and they know what torque is. They know what locking a joint is, which is a misnomer, but that's a common term. They're pretty familiar with all the terminology that has, from me, has become more accurate over the years. And one of the concepts that I tend to stress is that the purpose of doing these leg locks or traps or arm bars or whatever, all these other things that you are doing, your goal is to move the person's body. And unless you can lock the parent joint, and there are only 5 of those, the shoulders, the hips, and the neck. Okay, unless you lock one of those joints in grabbing an extremity, you're not going to be able to throw that person. And again, that's another general concept, but ultimately, if students understand that, then they understand why they have to go through the process they're going, why, you know, if you're going to do a hand throw, you're locking up the wrist joint, and then it locks the elbow joint, and then it locks the shoulder joint. And once it locks the shoulder joint, then the person's going to get thrown if you continue to apply pressure to the back of the hand. Okay. And continue pressure on the wrist joint. Okay. And they realize there's a common sequence: wrist, elbow, hip, or ankle, knee joint, hip, head, neck, torso. You know, they see that it's a really simple relationship, and it's a concept that can be applied to all 5 extremities, and it's easier for them to remember one general concept than it is to say, well, for the hip, you have to tighten up the hip. If someone's kicking you and you trap the foot and you turn it clockwise, if you turn it clockwise enough, you'll be able to throw them. But it doesn't explain why the person is off balance or why they're being thrown. Okay. If a person has really loose joints, you're going to have to work harder. But your technique, going back to working one-on-one with a student, is you have to rely on feel. You will know when the hip joint is locked by feel. You'll never be able to detect it by watching it, because watching it is subjective.
Sensei, I appreciate you breaking it down to 5 parent joints. Yesterday, I read there are 350 joints in a human body, and I'm going, wow. And I think I've mastered joint locks. I got a long ways to go. You just simplified it greatly. Thank you, sir.
I'm big on simplicity. I think I learned part of that from the only geography course I took in college was political geography, which is, why people live in certain areas. And, if you have certain geographic configurations, certain things are going to happen in that location. Such as if you're at the mouth of a river, you're probably going to have a harbor, you're going to have trade and all this other stuff. And then when I got transferred to high school, I was told, you're going to teach geography. I said, cool. They said, but we don't have a textbook. So I spent 2 years teaching geography out of an atlas, which, and then we got a textbook, and then the district canceled. Then the district canceled after they spent like, I don't know, the kids, I actually let the kids choose the textbook they wanted to have. So I figured, why should I as a teacher make that decision? They need to have something they can read and understand. And the school bought the textbooks, and then the district canceled the course, district-wide. So we had all these textbooks, sitting around. But anyway, but I taught it basically as political geography, which is different than saying, well, the Earth is somewhat round, and there are these different layers of the planet, and this is how mountains come to be, and all this stuff, which is, to me, is interesting but really irrelevant to a teenager. But if you say, what do you get between the ocean and land? They can say, what's between ocean and land? Starts
Sure.
with what?
The short,
The shore. And what do you have on the shore usually? Starts with the word B,
the beach.
the beach. And they could get that concept. And you normally don't have that taught in a geography class. But I think the issue is you have to be able to simplify things for your students. I know I have to do that as a sensei because I want them to understand why the technique works or how it's working without going into a humongous explanation of physiology or physics or Tai Sabaki, or are there 8 points in Tai Sabaki, or 4 or 16? I've seen some systems go up to 32, which I think is really ridiculous. And at that point, I'll usually raise my hand and say, they're actually 360 unless you encounter half degrees. And then we're at 720. There's a point after which information becomes really useless.
Hey, Sensei.
Yes.
Thanks to your explanation this morning, it occurred to me that once my opponent's feet leave the ground, I'm throwing all 350 joints at the same time.
Usually are, yes. And the same thing, conversely, nothing moves in isolation.
Yeah, that's right.
So, I mean, I'm dealing with this broken toe, which I now have to have another series of x-rays on because the podiatrist, which I still have to see, thinks that because the fracture was in the joint, there are bone particles that are moving back and forth, and that's what's causing the pain. And they have to do something to pin I hate to use that word, they need to do something to pin these joints down so that that part of the foot can heal. But in the meantime, I'm wearing what's called a cam boot because it basically freezes the front of my foot and I can't move it. And that's solving the problem temporarily. But I take that boot off and give me 10 minutes and I'm up to around 8 or 9 as far as pain is concerned.
You need to lock the child joint.
Yeah, it's just, but anyway, I forgot what I was going to say here now. And initially they had me in a post-op shoe, which didn't do anything. And I said, that's because the muscles in the ankle reach down to the toes, don't they? And then the doctor said, yes. And I said, and that's why that area is hurting so much, because it's moving the broken bones. So he says, oh, that's why you switched to using the boot that was sitting in your garage for 15 years. I said, yes. He says, good decision. So, duh. But anyway, so as you said, that nothing moves in isolation on the human body. So, okay.
Just to play a devil's advocate for a second, I think so personally, obviously, I think physiology and all of that is important, and I love understanding it. Well, I don't know if it's important, but I love knowing it, and I study it, and I want to know it. But the more I'm thinking about this, remember Bugs Bunny cartoons where Elmer Fudd would start walking off of a cliff, and he would just keep walking, and then somebody would hand him a book about gravity, and as soon as he read about gravity, he fell. Things don't work that way. Like whether or not he's aware of gravity, he would fall.
But Wile E. Coyote had the same problem.
That's right.
But he didn't get a book.
And I think that martial arts work that way too. It's kind of like music. I love music theory and learning that and studying that. But if you put it first, it can get in the way of actually making music.
Yes.
And a lot of times music theory is better applied after the fact to understand why something worked. Like when you're just playing, you did it because it sounded good. And then after the fact, you're like, well, that's because if you look at the movement, that major 7 wants to resolve to the 1, and that sounds good, and that's why that worked. And I think the same thing with a wrist lock. When somebody grabs you, like you said, ultimately, you need to do it by feel. You need to be able to close your eyes and just touch them and feel that they're locked. You can't really say, okay, well, he's standing at this angle. I need to pull his arm 3 degrees to the left to lock the, carpal tunnel muscles or whatever. That happens later when you're like watching footage of it. You're like, oh, well, right there is where I locked this, and then that went to there. And, so I don't know. And it might get in the way of teaching. Maybe you just want to say, turn their arm until their body moves. Maybe that's better than saying, well, there's a series of 350 interconnected things that you need to worry about. Like sometimes things are better to say the technique is you grab him and you throw him, rather than you adjust your weight by an increment, you shift your foot forward, and there's too much minutia. And I think sometimes it's even though it is what you're doing and it's what you need to understand, sometimes focusing directly on that can get in the way.
Yeah. One of the ways I just thought of that where I get people to operate by feel rather than sight is, and I still have a bag of them. They're really cheap on Amazon, blindfolds. And if you blindfold the Tori, not the Uke, the Tori, don't blindfold them both, but if you blindfold the Tori and say, do a hand throw, the only thing they will actually do it because it helps them learn to rely on feel. But the one thing you have to watch out for is because they're blindfolded and they can't see what they're doing, they will tend to move a lot faster than they would in normal life. Because in normal life, they're relying on vision. With no vision, they just move. And so you have to tell them, execute the technique slowly, and you even have to remind them as you slow down, because they will move remarkably fast when they don't have their vision to control the speed at which they're executing techniques. And it also teaches them, which is not the direct reason, that on the street, that's how fast you're probably going to execute a technique. And that's why the injury occurs. Because you're just moving, it's an automatic reaction. You do it, it's over with. So you might want to try that with your students, and let them take the blindfolds home.
Sensei, there's also a reminder on the Uke side is that just remember to tell them that they can only defend a defendable attack. If they can't see a strike coming, they can't defend it.
Yeah, you have to tell them, you're going to, yes, if you can't see an attack coming, you're not going to be, doesn't matter. I can be a 25th dog, and if I don't see an attack coming, I'm dead meat.
Well, wait a minute. The ninjas have to roll out of the way of a sword behind him for a black belt. Come on. We can't do that.
I don't know if I told you this before. Years ago, we used to do for Nisei Week in Little Tokyo in Los Angeles. They used to invite us to do a jiu-jitsu demo because they couldn't find any Japanese dojo that had Japanese students that, and they eventually built them all. They brought us in, really nice facility, and we're doing our demo, and there's this little old Japanese lady sitting up front, in a chair, and she indicates to come over, and I came over to her, and she says, "What are those people doing that are rolling from store to store down the aisle?" And I looked over there and I said, they're ninja. And she says, it's totally straight face. They're not doing a very good job. So, 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 you know, you have to, I don't know where that went, but in any case, you do have to let your uke know what technique they can do. You have to be specific. You just say, okay, it's going to be for a lapel grab, and the technique is not really important, or the attack is not really important. What is important by blindfolding the student is that they realize that, one, they can do the technique by feel. They don't need to look at what they're doing. And secondly, they need to be aware of how much faster they're moving versus using their vision. And this will, then when they take the blindfold off and practice without using their sight, you know, they turn it to the left, they do a hard left, as Dave said, and they do the technique, they're amazed that, oh my God, the technique worked fast. And then they begin to realize they have to slow down in order to protect their uke, who you've told, go with the technique no matter how badly you think it's being done. Because if it's being done halfway correct and you resist, odds are you're going to end up with a fracture because they can't see what's happening. All they can do is judge by feel. And it's not nice to feel a fracture from either end. So anyhow,
Sensei, something I wanted to add. There's like 2 points that I wanted to make. So just going off of your perspective, if keeping things simple, and Dane's perspective of knowing things later, is I'm basically putting 2 and 2 together, and I come up with 5. It's when teaching everything to the lower levels, keep it simple. As you start progressing up the ranks, yes, explain in more details, explain why this works more or better in some way. I think that's a good approach. Second point, because Devin mentioned summer camp, and I'm just reminded of what we were working on. Remember what I said about the forearm and the top, the radius and the ulna? Well, I was in uke for Darren, and one of the what I was supposed to do is I was supposed to indicate that I have a knife. I would lunge at him, and this is part of the anatomy of why this works. When he would strike down, he would use his ulna on top of my radius. Remember I said earlier, the ulna is the thicker part of the bone. This is what provides the structure. The radius helps turn the wrist, right? So the thicker bone slamming on top of the smaller bone can actually cause a fracture. That's why it hurts more. Understanding that kind of physiology does help to understand the martial art. But again, going back to the first point, you have to be able to simplify it for the not only for the lower belts, but you're also simplifying it so that they're not spending an hour talking about the small little minute details.
right. Yes.
There's a saying from somewhere, like give the milk to babies and save the meat for men, or something like that. Kind of reminds me of that. They need to eat, but they can't digest steak yet. You know.
Oh, and I still have but I don't have it anymore. But I did leave the camp with a nice little dark bruise on my wrist. Thanks, Darren.
In the old days, and this is Sensei, probably why Seki taught this way, the mentality for teaching was there's a saying, right? I think I may have shared it before, is a teacher tells a student where to look, but not what to see. So that's why they didn't offer detailed information on how to do stuff, because you have to discover it in your own way, because that leads to a better understanding. Once a student has understood, has discovered it on their own, then you add the technical aspect of it to make them more efficient at what they do. But you don't introduce the technical breakdown before they gain that level of understanding, because then their understanding is going to be based on your understanding.
Yeah.
And it's never going to be the same. So you tell them where to look, but you don't tell them what to see. And you guide them, make sure they don't get injured, they don't go too far off the path. Let them discover it. Then you add what we're calling here the physicality, the science, to make them more efficient on what they do. It was the same with healing arts, right? A lot of martial artists, were also into healing. Is that I think of it as kind of the voodoo doctors. They know if they took this part of a herb and this part of a plant and mixed it together and did some things, it either became a medicine or a poison or something else. They didn't really understand the chemical properties, but it worked. They didn't need to understand. They just knew, if I do this, this, and this way for this long, this is what I come up with. So as our understanding of science improves, then you add that to it. Now you understand why those things work. And then that allows you to now propel and excel to higher levels and make more advancements. So it's the same mentality, basically. I train with somebody that's still the same way. He'll never explain the details of things, but I enjoy discovering it. That's a part of it. And speed, we were talking about speed. I think it's more important to ask why speed is necessary or important, because a lot of times when people do things fast, it's not necessary at all. If you think about it, speed is so you can do something before they have a chance to compensate, one, or two, you're trying to develop momentum to deliver power, maybe for impact or something else. But other than that, what's the rush? Especially if you're grappling or something, there's nothing imminent that's happening that quickly, a lot of times. But it's the sense that you must act fast, otherwise the opportunity's gone, which may be true, but sometimes it's not, So it's just asking those questions. That's why you got to let the student sometimes just think through it. Let them fail, let them experiment, and just guide them so that they don't go off the wrong way for too long, basically.
Good concept, Chris. Tell them where to look, not what to see. Love it.
Yeah.
Very well said. I think, you have to, I didn't mean to say that you have to do techniques fast. Okay. I think this speed comes naturally with improved quality. And, a student, if blindfolded, because they're not dealing with this vision aspect, they just tend to move faster.
Yep.
That's why you have to give them the verbal, slow down, take your time, because you don't want them to injure their uke. But speed, as I tell my students, even people that are testing for black belt, I say, I am not looking for speed on any technique. I want to see that you're doing the technique correctly. Okay. And obviously higher ranks will do techniques faster because they're more comfortable with them. And their uke is also better trained and can handle the speed at which they're executing techniques. Which is the role of the uke, which is the next topic. But yeah, you do not. Speed in itself has no value. There has to be a legitimate reason for it, you know. And my approach to, you know, yes, you're going to do the technique faster because your body knows what to do. You don't have to think about doing it, because on the street, that's where you have to be. Your body just does it. And that's the difference. But I do like the difference in, you know, let the student figure some things out. I know when I taught school, I use simulations a lot, because I found as a teacher it was just an easier way to get a concept across to students than me doing a lecture or them reading it in the book or all these other things, you know, things, which tend to be more tedious and students don't enjoy doing anyway.
I wanted to bring up something to Eric and just share, Eric, that bruises don't count as injuries. They're merely flesh wounds. Bumps and bruises are
I was never saying I was injured. I was just giving Darren a hard time.
So
Eric was just thanking Darren.
yeah.
Exactly.
Bruises are a receipt.
Bruising is better than losing.
Yeah.
So Darren, you're still in the clear there, buddy.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Hold
you're
on
good.
to
I just gotta give Darren a hard time.
Do we want to get into what is the role of a uke?
One more comment, Sensei, on the previous topic is
Yeah.
you know, with speed as the reference point. You know, I always instruct beginner to experienced individuals. I always say the same thing, that just to reiterate what you said. Look, there's no need to go fast. I just want to see the technique, and I want to see the technique being performed correctly. And as they continue to gain experience and understanding of the technique and how it works in every aspect of it, you know, it's all about it becomes faster because it becomes smoother. Because if you're looking at it and you're saying it's, you know, fast is smooth and smooth is fast, right? And so you become more proficient at that technique, more experienced with that technique. Therefore, it flows better and it becomes faster.
Right. It's that the old Marine Corps saying slow equals smooth equals fast.
Yes.
And I
It can
forget.
also be uke dependent. You know, with a less experienced uke, going slow is for their safety. With a more experienced uke you've worked with, you know they can fly.
Yeah. I mean, I will. I say if I can get a higher rank to be a uke for a lower rank, I know the odds are better that the Tori, the person doing the technique, will learn it faster because they're not. How do you say? They're not. It's not that they're not worried about resistance or injuring the person. Well, they're still worried about injuring the person. Because I'll tell students what techniques are designed to do if you go full bore. I think you have to be honest with students. They need to know what will happen. But I think if you have an upper rank as a uke, they're more familiar with the technique. They can go with it. They know when to tap out. They can use. They're better at using good judgment. Okay. All these things that are not on any belt exam.
They can give good feedback too. Like that was a good throw. That was a bad throw.
Yes, they give better feedback. They may also help the lower rank do the technique more correctly. I mean, so they're teaching at the same time. Don't always get that situation, but that's ideally what you'd like to see as a sensei. And even though the higher rank may also throw the lower rank with the same technique, the lower rank and then gets the experience of what the technique may feel like if it's done properly, albeit slowly. So
There are times, Sensei, that even the lower ranks, to compensate their bad techniques, would use speed and power. Whereas those who are more experienced will do less power and less speed.
yes, yes, because you realize if you do the technique, you don't need power.
Yeah, power, yeah.
Yeah. It's just it's all key, which now you have to explain what key is to students. And you say it's like the key that unlocks the door. You don't have key, door no unlock. Or at the park dojo, sometimes you can say you can have key, turn it, and door still doesn't unlock. Which is why they're going to be replacing it with an FOB or fob. But in any case, yeah, it's so the value of a good uke is that they will help their partner to learn a technique better and more effectively. And I guess the last question there is how do you help students become the best possible uke they can be? Because if you have good ukes, students are going to learn faster, they're going to learn better. So how do you get your students to be good uke?
That's a good point. That's something nobody ever teaches, right? You teach how to do a fall, you teach them how to fall properly, but you don't teach them how, like when and how to, do that. You spend all of your time on the Tori. And I think, as a beginner, the first time you're an uke for somebody, I think you're far more afraid than the first time you're a Tori. Like you just don't know what's expected of you, kind of.
Yeah, I will try to say to them, if you're the uke, yeah, obviously, if you're gonna go, you need to fall. Okay, I'll say go in a direction that relieves the pain. Don't see how much pain you can take before you fall. And that's a hard concept for them to get. Because I usually say if you're feeling pain, there's some damage occurring to your body already. That's your body. That's your body telling you something is wrong. So I try to get them to just go with wherever the uke wants you to go. If and fall as best you can. Cooperate with them, okay, and you'll be okay. The hard part, if you get an uke who can do that, is that if you have a lower ranked student and they're doing a technique and they see the person falling, they'll let go. And the hard part is to get the Tori to understand, keep hold of this person you are throwing until they are down, because there's other stuff, if there's other stuff you may want to do when they are down, if you haven't injured them yet. I've never had a student in a street situation who has had to go down to the mat. There are about 6 or 7 students that have been in that situation. In every case, the attacker was injured when they hit the ground. Usually because of ground impact rather than the technique itself. Because concrete's hard.
It's not the falling, Sensei. It's
Pardon?
the side stop. It's not the
And there's another thing here, and that is for the Tori, one of the things, and it's hard for them to learn initially, but I do try. especially they get it is once your attacker is falling, either keep hold, but let them control their fall, or if it's like a judo type throw, pull up on their gi sleeve so they land on their side rather than their back. Because you as a Tori have some responsibility to protect your uke as well, because you want him back next week so you can throw him again. I know all of you can throw a person and put them down onto the ground as gentle as snowflakes, okay? Because you know how to pull the person up or do whatever you need to do so they don't land hard. But that's something that's not usually taught. But see, I look at that as controlling your attacker, because you may not actually want to injure them that much. If you can throw them, put them on the ground and not really hurt them, maybe you can use some verbal suggestions. Maybe we should have a drink instead if you're in a bar, or
Sensei, the problem sometimes is that for some schools or for some people is how they define what's a good uke. For those guys, like the good uke is that 100% compliant, which means even if the Tori is doing a bad technique, the uke will still fall. But basically, as an uke, your role is for the other person to learn. And if you're just doing 100% compliance, that person is not learning anything. He's learning bad techniques instead of good techniques. So
is 100% compliance even possible, though? That they're still going to be doing some form of movement. You're still going to be connected. You can conceivably throw yourself to a large extent, but would not the Tori still be learning?
there are I've seen not to say that that it's wrong or right, but from what I experienced, I've seen a lot of people who are like they never can pass the exam, and then next month guys will be saying, oh, he's got a better uke, he's gonna pass this one.
I've encountered what he's talking about too.
Yeah.
Where it is absolutely, they throw themselves completely. Like as soon as somebody touches their hand, they will jump in the air and throw themselves on their sides.
Right.
That's right.
It's a very fine line. When I used to be on the AJA board, we decades ago, we had a dojo that applied for membership. They have to do a video of the sensei reacting to random continuous attacks. Okay, hunky-dory, fine. They had it choreographed to drum music, which wasn't too bad, but the uke was taking the throws before the Tori was actually doing them.
Yes.
And we told them, send us a real video. And they never did. But
I agree with that as well. What I was just saying, and exactly what Dane said. I correct that immediately when I'm instructing. That I don't agree with somebody. What I would refer to when I do see it is anticipating the fall to be in front of it. I believe that takes completely away from everything that you're trying to teach for that person, to that individual to learn on both sides, Tori and uke. And then that only creates an issue if they ever have to use that technique in a real life scenario. And then all of a sudden they find out how it doesn't work. And they're wondering why it doesn't work, because the whole time they're getting this false sense of security in a classroom environment, thinking that, oh, okay, I could do this, and this is what the result of it is, when in reality, they don't have that uke, if you will. They have somebody that's truly trying to do something to them, and now they have to use that technique to be effective, and it's not, because they're not doing anything.
That's true.
I have no problem with a uke going along with the technique, with the execution. What I will say to the student, if they're being 110% compliant or getting ahead, I'll say, what if Tori decides to change technique halfway through the throw? What's going to happen to you? And that brings them to a complete standstill, because they realize that if they're going one way and ultimately the Tori, particularly in brown belt and up, decides to change the technique midway through or modify it, they're going to get hurt, and it's going to be their fault.
Yeah.
And that's the question. If I get a student who's being 100% cooperative and getting ahead of the throw, that's what I will ask them. Because
Agreed, Sensei. I always say the same thing. You can't do that. You never know if somebody is going to change direction, do a transition, move into a different technique. There's a fine line of give take, right? You have to be able to experience what I call the inspiration, if you will, to be able to know where you're starting to move in an effort to be able to be a good uke in the gray area of give take.
Right. It's a fine, but I found that, and maybe I got this from classroom experience in dealing with simulations with my kids, because they'd come to me and say, what do I do now? And I'd say, these are your possibilities, or I'm not sure, try something and see what happens. Because simulation, no one's going to really get hurt anyway. But you have to, sometimes you just have to ask the student a question that makes them stop and think. And they can figure it out on their own. There are very few people that are totally stupid. I had a PE coach, 7th grade, another little runt, and he was like 6'10". His nickname was Spider Raines. His last name was Raines, R-A-I-N-E-S. And first day of class, he says something which I've always remembered. He says, I can deal with dumb. If you're ignorant and don't know any better, that's okay. But don't go stupid on me. He said, a dumb person doesn't know anything. A stupid person knows better, but does a dumb thing anyway. So that's stuck with me for, how old was I? 12, and I'm 79 now. That's stuck with me for 65, 67 years. And I ran into him as a PE coach in high school again, but he was a lot mellower then.
But Sensei, the other side of the coin, by the way, of being 100% compliant is a senior person trying to sabotage the partner. It's like, I'm not going to go down, whatever he does. That's like, there's like what Darren was saying a while ago. It's, you got to have the balance.
Yeah. If I run into a student like that, I'm really blunt with them. I say, you're endangering your own safety. You're not in this class to keep him from learning a technique. That's why you're here as an uke. You're endangering his safety and your safety. And if you're going to continue to do this, you're either going to spend some time just sitting in a chair watching the class, if it's a kid, or you may ultimately, I'll have to remove you from the class as a safety hazard. Now, one thing that's really important, and it's a big CYA, for those of you that were at summer camp, on one of the bulletin boards that I had out there, what was on it? Does anyone remember? I had the safety rules. Okay. You've got to have, and one thing about rules, and I learned this as a teacher, I got this words of wisdom from another teacher a long time ago. He said, the more rules you have, the more time you'll spend enforcing those rules and less time you'll spend teaching. So you keep your rules as short and as few as possible.
Mhm.
And Coach Raines had it simple. It's okay to be dumb, don't be stupid. But I think I have like 12 rules. And I expect my students to follow them because it's all for their safety. And you also have to have them up for your own liability protection. So if someone comes back and say, well, I didn't know, I didn't know we weren't supposed to do that. And then sensei can say, safety rules. And in the release, it says you agreed to follow these rules. Okay, it's a matter of CYA. And if the students don't know what CYA means, it means cover your assets. and it's something I've always followed. Even in a regular classroom, I think I maybe had 6 or 8 rules, and that was it.
Yeah. What we were taught, sensei, in Japan is that for a good uke, they call it sunao, or sincerity of an uke. So to be sincere is that when you know it's not a proper technique, don't go down. But when it's a proper technique, don't challenge it, just go down with it.
Yeah.
That way you learn, and the partner also learns as well.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell a student, if you're an uke and the person does the wrong technique, or they're doing the technique incorrectly, you still need to go down to protect yourself. Okay, that's the number 1 rule in class. That's the number 1 rule in self-defense. That's the number 1 rule in jiu-jitsu. Protect yourself. Because if you don't protect yourself, you can't protect anyone else. But that's another story. And I can see where if they're doing the wrong technique, you shouldn't go down. But the Tori may assume that resistance to be simple resistance, and they may pursue with whatever they're doing wrong just to prove their point. And if they're lucky, they manage to execute the technique, and you will probably receive an injury. So it's not worth it. So I'll tell them, just go down anyway. And if the person has done the technique wrong, tell them they did the technique wrong, or they're doing wrong, or just say, get the sensei's attention.
And I think we can exclude that scenario, right?
I'm sorry, Dan, go ahead.
I was just saying, I think we can exclude that. I think that's totally fine. That's just like you're taking the throw. It's like a courtesy fall rather than this like lie that you did such a great throw that I got thrown through the sky.
Right.
This is like, as soon as you get up, you're like, listen, that did not work whatsoever. Like I fell down, but I just fell down on my own just so nobody got hurt. Let's talk about that.
Yeah,
that's totally different. That's just a learning moment.
Yeah.
That's not the uke flying and throwing himself everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, that's where you get up and say, I fell for my own, to protect myself for my own safety. It does not mean that you did the technique right or that you did the technique. Right. I mean, and hopefully you can say that in a tactful manner.
Yeah, here's what could have made that better. Yeah, whatever.
But it's as an uke, your number 1 responsibility is to protect yourself from injury.
It makes you a bad Tori to be a bad uke.
Yes.
If you are just the moment, I think sometimes too, there's an impulse that you're, I don't know, trying to help the Tori to show off or something by being thrown so gracefully or whatever, or you just want to show how great you take falls or whatever it is. I think also sometimes you're terrified of the pain of a joint technique, or you're like terrified of the throw. So you like throw yourself rather than let the person throw you. So like before you ever even come close to feeling a Kodagaishi, you've jumped up in the air and fallen on your side.
Yeah.
And you're never going to know what to look for in a Kotegaeshi. You're never going to know where is it where that makes the person start falling.
Right.
You know where you start falling when it's happened to you. You're like,
Right.
that's the point of no return. But you don't know how to do that if you just jump immediately, you know?
But that
Exactly what Brian was saying a while ago, anticipating the technique.
Yeah.
that goes back to this person who is jumping into the throw before the throw is done.
Right.
They are becoming a safety hazard, and it goes
Yeah.
back to the question: what if Tori changes his mind and switches to another technique or variation? You know what's going to happen to you? And
One of the things that happens in classes, though, is you have an opportunity to work with a great many Tories and a great many Ukis. You seldom have one person working with the same person through the entire class. So you're going to do those techniques with other people.
yeah,
Right.
and that's something I falter on at times. I'll let people work out with each other during the whole class.
Hmm.
And there is strength to making them work out with different people.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because that, you're looking for you're looking for that certain feel,
Yeah.
or whatever, and that certain feel is going to be common regardless of the size of the person. But if you're always working with the same person, you get used to each other, and you can make each other look good.
For some people, we're 45 minutes in, it's like I'm done. And Abuki for other people, we're 2 hours later, it's like I'm still going. This is awesome. And generally the person who pulls on my gi, I'm appreciative. They didn't plant me through the 1-inch mat we were working on at the time, the concrete floor underneath it. The people who weren't pulling up, I'm done after about 45 minutes. I'm ready to. It's Miller time.
Okay. Is there anything else we need to deal with on the role of the uke? Because we're getting into 2 hours here.
I'm going to need to roll, Sensei.
Same here.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think we'll close it up at this point. And I'm sorry we lost a couple of people in the process. And next one will be 14 days will be December 16. I think that's it. In 14 days. Yeah. Are we going to be okay on that date?
I think so.
I think so.
Okay.
I'm good.
So anyway, I want to thank all of you. It was a good session, and I enjoyed it. I learned some things. And hopefully I'll get this out within the next couple days. I know Darren is working arduously on the summer camp videos.
Oh,
The overview video is absolutely fantastic. I want to compliment you, Darren and Brandon. Extremely professionally well done. And so I want to compliment you on that. And I think that's about it at this point. And we'll see you all on the 16th.
Very good. Thank you all.
You don't.
Thank you.
I'm not going to.
Hey, nice to meet you again.
I'm not going to require that you wear an ugly Christmas sweater.
Strongly encouraged.
No. We've been to parties like that already. Not this year, but previous years. It gets to be pretty pathetic. Anyway. So anyway, have a great rest of Saturday and Sunday, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Okay.
Very good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good. Take
Thank
care.
you. Bye-bye.